right. Good morning. So, I had started a sermon series on the 5 acts of worship, and we got through 3 of them. We got through prayer, we got through the communion, we got through singing. And last week I was asked by 4 people to start a different series on what Christians need to be doing. Because of how many people asked me, I decided that it was best to go ahead and set aside the previous sermon series. So we're going to do a 3-week-long sermon series on what a Christian must be. If you count out the dates, that means that we're going to end the week right before Mother's Day. I will do a Mother's Day sermon, and then we will finish the last 2 in the acts of worship. Today, we're going to be talking about how a Christian must be present. A Christian must be present at home. A Christian must be present at assembly. And a Christian needs to be present in their community. We're going to start with Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 25. We'll also be in Matthew chapter 5 and John chapter 17, if you would like to go ahead and mark those. But for now, we're turning our attention to Hebrews chapter 10. Starting in verse 23. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, so much more as you see the day approaching. Let's go ahead and read Matthew chapter 5 and John chapter 17 as well. We're not reading the whole chapter. Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? Is it then good for nothing but to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men? And you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. And John chapter 17, verses 14 through 19. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, because they are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth, and you have sent me into the world. I also have sent them into the world. And for their sakes I sanctify myself. They may also be sanctified by the truth. These seemingly disjointed thoughts, I've combined them together into this sermon on the need to be present, because we're not called to hide ourselves away. We're not called to shut ourselves into a monastery and never be present in the world. But likewise, we're not called to simply be separate people living separate lives from one another. We are called to be Christians who are a family gathered together to shine brightly together, to be, as he puts it, a city set on a hill that cannot be hidden. And a city is not made up of one person, but a city is made up of a group of people who collectively shine bright enough to be seen by everyone. So we're expected to be present. And in that present, we're expected to be intentional. In fact, we must be intentional with our actions. We're going to start by talking about the need to be present at assembly, because it's the one people have probably heard the most often. So we'll go ahead and get it out of the way. But just because it's the one people hear the most often doesn't mean it's any less important. In fact, I think Hebrews chapter 10, verses 23 through 26 or 25, it's very, very clear about what it's talking about. You need to be present at the assembling of the saints. We're not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. There are very few good reasons to miss being present as the church is worshiping God. And the obvious one is, well, if you're sick, it's not very Christian to go get everyone else sick. But there's a lot of very poor reasons to shrug off worship. I'm not going to list all of them off here. But if entertainment of any kind, if something that just is not important in the long run is getting in the way of worshiping God and being present with your church family, it's more likely to do a lot more harm than good. Not just in the long run, but in the short term, because you need to be feeding your spiritual life. Imagine for a moment that I went a whole week without eating. What would you expect to happen to my body? We'll say I'm drinking water, so I'll make it a week. Pretty easy, being a healthy, fairly young man. I'll tell you what medically will happen. At about the 6-day mark, my body will begin to eat its own, not just the fat reserves in my body, but will also begin to tear apart the muscles in my body. And more likely than not, I will begin to urinate blood because of that destructive factor. Well, if you're not reading and studying the Bible on your own, and then you're only coming in one day out of the week, and maybe not even that, your spiritual life is going to begin to die. And when you read about the early church, when you read about what the first few congregations were doing weekly, It wasn't just weekly that they were meeting together. We're told that they met together and broke bread daily. That our need for fellowship is perhaps even far greater than we realize. And I've never got the sense from the first bit of Acts that every member of the church in the first century were meeting together daily, but rather that at least individual groups, there was always some group meeting together on any given day for study and fellowship. And that it was sort of the norm to expect most of your days to be meeting up with some Christian or other. Obviously, that's not going to work for a full schedule all year round. But even meeting together 2 or 3 times a week would probably fulfill what it is the first century Christians were doing. Humans are, after all, social creatures. I don't know if you're aware of this, but a lot of psychologists are pushing for solitary to be removed from prisons on the basis of it being very cruel and unusual punishment. Because solitary confinement can cause a relatively sane man to go insane within just a few short days. Even a few hours can be very detrimental to mental health, of just absolutely no contact. It's the no possibility of contact with others. Because humans are social creatures, God designed us to want to spend time with each other. And, there's this whole thing, especially with people of my generation, of, well, I'm an introvert or I'm an extrovert, and that means that I either recharge away from people or recharge not with people. Well, a lot of people in my generation who claim to be introverts, which I'm not convinced all of the ones who claim to be introverts are actually introverts, but what a lot of them forget is that being an introvert does not mean that you don't need people. It means that you recharge away from people, but you still need to recharge your social battery. So when I say that we need to be present at the assembling of ourselves together, I'm not just talking about the worship service, although that's very important. But there was a lot, the early church were a lot better and closer together, and they were more of a family than sometimes we are in the present day. Because the early church fellowshipped together. And we need, like I said, we need to be intentional about how it is that we're living. We need to be intentional about the way that we're living our Christian life. And that includes being intentional in how we are fellowshipping with our fellow Christians. But we need to also be present at home. When I was first brought on here as the minister, I made it very clear that I was going to have days and even weeks that I set aside to spend time with my kids. Now, meant to mention this at the beginning. Me and Trish have discussed it, and I need to start having office hours at this building again. And we were thinking about having me start for 1 or 2 hours this week. But she needed me at home for a little bit because of Matthew's age. That, and he's a very you don't quite see everything that happens. He's a very fussy baby, despite being quiet right now. And he can be hard to get down for naps. But one of the reasons I stressed my need to put time in for my children is because there's a lot of preachers who forgot to be present at home. So this isn't just a problem with people in the church. It's not just a problem with people in the world. There are plenty of preachers who fall into the trap of not being present at home too. Because kids cannot and do not learn about God without help. And one of the things that I've been mentioning whenever it comes up in the books of Genesis and Exodus, and I will continue in the books of Leviticus and Numbers, it doesn't quite come up so much in Deuteronomy. But the first 4 books stress the need to teach your children about who God is. And thus, they stress the need to teach your children to teach their children who God is. There are lots of reasons for this, but the first and foremost is children cannot learn about God unless you help them learn about God. Children must be shown the way of righteousness. They cannot intuit it on their own. And that's not to say that there's nothing that you can't learn. There are obvious things that are just obvious due to nature that they're wrong. Murder is quite obviously wrong. There is not a society in this world, no matter how godless, that does not recognize the error of murder. First of all, a society can't function if anyone can just murder someone whenever they want. But there's unobvious things. Would you have known that covetousness was immoral unless God had revealed it to you? I don't think there's a way in the natural world to parse out that covetousness is wrong. So when I say that children cannot intuit who God is, I mean that there are aspects of God that you can figure out from the natural world, but you cannot get the whole picture. You cannot learn who God truly is unless it's taught to you. And the home is one of the most important mission fields. It's the primary source of knowledge for children, and it is their first taste of wisdom. You know, I do a sermon at least once a month on the Proverbs. And one of the reasons I love the Proverbs so much is that my father really loved the Proverbs and instilled in me a love for the wisdom that they contain. And that's not to say that there aren't other places to get wisdom. There's plenty of other places to get wisdom. But that's the power of a parent, is to instill in their children a love for something. And lastly, we need to be present in the community. We brought up the light shining on the hill, and we're in the world but not of the world, or that concept that's there in John chapter 17. Because that's what Christ is getting at, is his disciples, they're not of the world. If you're truly following Christ, then you're not part of this world, not in a real sense, because you've been set apart. You've been made different. You've been made into the salt and that light of the world. Something unique and interesting. Something important. And yet we're in the world. We live here, we grow here, we die here. We are different, but our light must be moving. It needs to be active. Like I said at the beginning, we're not called to be monks in monasteries, right? We're not called to cloister ourselves away and to have no contact with the outside world, except maybe the occasional shipment of food. No, we're here to show Christian morality to all men. We're here to show them what it means to be made in the image of God, to be called and to be made different. How shall they believe in whom they have not heard? And the very first way that most people will interact with the gospel is through your actions. That's not to say that you can preach the entire gospel with just how you act. But people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so we're here to show them the gospel. Because our actions speak at least as loud as our words, and our words fill in the blanks our actions cannot speak. Right, it's the Ethiopian eunuch and Philip. Philip is walking along, and the Ethiopian eunuch is driving, and Philip asks him if he can understand what he's reading, which in itself is an action that tells the eunuch that Philip is a man with knowledge, and he cares that the eunuch might have it too. And through that action of caring, the eunuch allows him in to preach to him Jesus and him crucified through the book of Isaiah. Are we being present in our community? Are we being present in our families? Are we being present in the assembling of the saints together? Because if there's one thing that the Bible makes very clear, is that a Christian must be present. Is anyone here who needs to repent of sin? If you need to begin a walk with Christ, an intentional walk with Christ, understanding that you're being called to be present in your congregation and your community, If you need prayers, if there's any way that the church here can help you, we do urge you to come forward as we stand and sing our invitation song.